But anyway, thank you so much for giving me this wonderful opportunity. And Ken, it was great to spend the day with you yesterday, and Luke as well. I saw my first farm in my whole life. So, but I live in Hollywood, California. I'm here with my son, Jay Brubaker, who was born and raised in Southern California as well. And I could tell you about the journey of the Brubaker family to Hollywood, but there's really only one guy that went, and that's this handsome fellow right here, Lloyd Burkholder Brubaker, who was born and raised right here in this town in 1904. And I grew up in Southern California, went to Hollywood High School. You might have heard about that. Grew up under that sign that said Hollywood right on the hill. And I went to USC, University of Southern California. And I worked in Los Angeles for 50 years. I'm 75 years old, and I have never, ever met one other Brubaker in Southern California in 75 years. And I asked myself, why in the world would I never meet one? And then I came to Lancaster and I realized, well, you're all right here. You know, they're in town here, and so it's so good to meet my family, and so many of you are connected with me and cousins, and I listened to some of you talk, and I first called Ken when I heard about this wonderful organization, and I swear I thought I was talking to my brother. I mean, so many of you talk and laugh. Like we have a lot of humor in our family. I think that's in our DNA, and I think you're gonna see that a little bit today. And so I learned from my father a long time ago that there's one thing you always do when you're talking about people, and that is that ladies go first. So there are 4 ladies that are not here with us today. And the first one I want to acknowledge and thank is Michelle Brubaker, my son's wife, beautiful woman, a millennial who understands the internet. And when she got married to my son 3 years ago, she thought she ought to Google the Brubaker name to find out what she got herself into. And she said to my son, she said, does your dad know about the Brubaker family reunion? Didn't have a clue. I heard about it. I tracked down Ken. A few months later, here I am, back to my roots. So the internet works, and I'm glad my son made a beautiful choice with a smart lady who's like my daughter. The other Brubaker is Virginia Brubaker. That's my mom. She passed away at the age of 99. And she married this handsome galoot. And she's a farmer as well. Family came from Nebraska, Central City. And she was quite a wonderful, strong lady. And she was really the spiritual foundation of our family before, during, and after my father's death. And the other lady that's not here that's very important is Amy Hull. Amy Hull is a southern, well-educated lady from Alabama, and she had a daughter by the name of Kobe Stockard, who later became Kobe Stockard Brubaker, my wife. And I'll show you some pictures a little bit later about of all the family, but I did want to acknowledge Amy. She was a very smart lady, and she's 90 years old. She just turned 90 April 1st, and April Fool's Day. But I called her and told her that, and she said, no, I'm no fool. And she said, my daughter isn't either. She married you. So I like the way she thinks. And of course, her daughter was Kobe Brubaker, who passed away when Jay was just 2. And but she was a love of my life, a terrific woman, good looking, Auburn University graduate, and she was a flight attendant on a Eastern Airlines flight from Boston to Jacksonville. And she was nice enough to talk to the old guy, the old bachelor, mid-30s, in seat 14B. And not only did she marry him, or talk to him, she married me. And so that's quite a love story. And then, of course, I have 3 other sisters, and so there are a lot of women on the West Coast that came later, but my dad was the first one that came. So now that we know that the Brubakers have a lot of smart lady in the family, a lot of smart women, let me tell you about a little bit about this young man here, Jay Lloyd Brubaker. Jay Lloyd was my dad's name when he was in the movies back in the 30s. They didn't think at MGM Studios that Lloyd Burkholder would work in the movies. So they liked names like John Wayne, Cary Grant, Gary Cooper, so he was Jay Lloyd. And I named my son after my dad's motion picture name, Jay Lloyd Brubaker, right here. So, and now I'm going to try and do something I'm not very good at. Yeah, Doug, it's the one on the left, right?
One on the left.
All right. There it is, we did it. Technology worked, doesn't it? So anyway, I want you now to see the boys in the Brubaker family. That is my dad. That was one of his pictures from his portfolio. That is me with one of my grandkids. That's my son, Jay Lloyd, and the little guy on your right is Justin David Brubaker. He's 2 years old as of last Sunday, and he had made it very clear to all of us, it's his world and the rest of us are just passing through. So I was able to find a few old photos of my family, my dad's family in the early days, in the early 1900s. And the fellow with a circle around his face his head is my dad when he was about 14. And this is him, the big tall guy. He grew to be 6'4", which is pretty darn tall for a Brubaker or anybody else for that matter in the early 1900s. And so he was a farmer for a few years. He was born and raised here, and he went to school until the 8th grade. That was all the school that was available at that time. And then he went back to the farm, and he learned how to be left-handed and right-handed at the same time, and he could pick the crops both times, both hands working. But he did not like farming that much, and that beautiful car was one of the early Model Ts, and he fell in love with cars. And so that's what got him to actually leave the Lancaster area. let's see where I am here.
That's a Chevy.
That is a Chevy. I'm so sorry. You guys that know your cars. Because his first job, no, excuse me, because his first job was selling Chevys. And so he left after being in this area. He left for Dallas, Texas. But before he left, he was a man that learned from his family a lot of the values that still are important to our family today. And I learned from him integrity and honesty, humor and laughter, respect, politeness, punctuality. And in fact, one of his really favorite lines to me whenever I would be late, he'd say, "Son, if you can't be on time, be 5 minutes early." And that has served me well my whole life. It really is. I think that's, and I've tried to pass that on to my family as well. So in 1924, at the age of 19, he left Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to go sell cars for Chevrolet and to be a salesman, and then he succeeded and ultimately became a sales manager in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And during the next years, the next 9 years, he did very well. But something happened in 1929 that a lot of you probably remember, or at least have heard about. The Depression happened, and the market for cars, of course, dried up. And here he was thinking about, how am I going to sell cars when the consumer expenditures and the income for consumers, disposable income, was virtually nil. Then serendipity struck. In 1932, MGM Studios in Hollywood had the Great American Talent Search. And they had a train of actors and actresses that took off from Hollywood, went across the country to promote their movies and their studio. And one of their stops was Fort Worth, Texas. And he was not an actor. He was a good salesman, and he was very likable, and something wonderful happened. He met Mae West. Now, you can't make that up unless you're in Hollywood. And for stories with stories that I don't totally know, because he passed away when I was 15, she decided she would bring him to Hollywood as one of her selections. And I'm told it took him about a minute to decide to go. So when he left Dallas, he now took off for the California coast. And that's a long way from Lancaster. But that completed his journey west. And at this point, I thought it made sense to perhaps turn the mic over to somebody that looks a lot more like an actor than I ever did. And I'm gonna let my son tell you what happened to my dad, Jay Lloyd Brubaker, in Hollywood. So hold on, more will be revealed.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Dad.
he certainly put a lot of time and work into this. Let's hear it for that. I on the other hand, didn't even really look over what I was going to read until yesterday, and he asked me why not. Why don't you prepare more? And I said, who cares? It's just in front of family anyway. So, anyway, before I go on with this story, I want to share. Obviously, I didn't know my grandpa because he died when my dad was 15. But the one story that I always remember, because my dad and I like to play cards together, which is something he did with his dad. But they used to play gin, and when his dad would lose, which wasn't often, but when David would beat Lloyd, he would my grandpa with a very stoic look, he'd take the deck and he'd throw it into the fireplace. That would be the end of the game. I always remember that story. Anyway, so let's go. So where we left off was that Mae West, who I had never heard of. All I knew was that hole number 12 at our country club, where we play golf, Bel Air Country Club, is called the Mae West hole because there's 2 mounds in front of the green. And that was all I knew about Mae West until researching for this project. So, apparently she was like Marilyn Monroe before she existed and was one of the more risque actresses of the time. Her line that she was known for was, "Hey there, big fella, why don't you come up and see me sometime?" Which, from what I understand, was pretty forward back then. This is my grandfather's first contract. It is an option contract that by term number 9 guarantees $750 a week. So this would be after he's been doing it for about 6 months. Now this was 1932, and I researched what this would be with inflation, and believe it or not, $12,900 today per week. Wow. So for a year, this was a pretty solid contract, to say the least. Yeah, exactly, during the Depression. Which was a time actually when the movie business was one of the few businesses that did well during the Depression.
Is that as good as real estate?
I wouldn't know. So my grandpa Brew, as we call him, and probably a lot of you folks call each other, had small parts in movies that were starred by the likes of Gary Cooper, John Wayne, Cary Grant, and a few other notables, but he never made the big time. However, he made many relationships with a lot of the Hollywood folks who would later go on to be his customers, particularly in a time when not a lot of people could afford the new technology of automobiles, which were popular in Hollywood and not many other places in LA. So there he is. I gotta think that at the time this was kind of like porn. So in 1936, my grandfather returned to his one true love, selling automobiles, and General Motors was happy to have him back. They made him the general sales manager of the Hollywood Cadillac division, in which he sold most of his cars to his peers from Hollywood, from acting, directors, producers, and the like. As the economy bounced back, so did Grandpa Brew, and he decided to branch out and to start his own dealership, which is no surprise after spending yesterday with Ken and seeing that most Brubakers seem to like to be their own boss, from what I've gathered. So this isn't really a surprise here. The Studebaker Corporation was the car company that he went with, and he opened up his own dealership, Brubaker Studebaker. There it is. So these were economically priced cars that were quite popular, and obviously had way for a great slogan that ran on the radio at the time, which said, Brubaker Studebaker, buy a family car, Brubaker Studebaker, close to where you are. Unfortunately, 5 years later, in 1955, the Studebaker Corporation went bankrupt, and including all of the dealers across the country. so they all went out of business. Studebaker quit manufacturing cars permanently. This was where Grandpa's resilience and entrepreneurship took flight. Out of near personal bankruptcy, he created Virginia Motors. This was named, there's Virginia Motors. And this was named after my grandmother, who, fortunately, she lived to be 99, so I got to spend a lot of time with my grandma, and that was where I heard a lot of stories about Brew. She would run the books, and he would do all of the operations for Virginia Motors. In 1957 is when this was off and running. He was selling Nissans, which he didn't want to call it Nissan because of the wars, and there was still some Japanese stigma in the U.S. So that was the reason that he named it Virginia Motors. And specifically, he was selling the Datsun, which was a make of the Nissan that ran for less than $1,000, which today would be like a $10,000 car. There it is. So he was one of the first folks to sell these cars, and for 4 years, from 1957 to 1961, Lloyd Burkholder Brubaker was the #1 Datsun seller. During these years, I'm going to let my dad take it from there, because that was about the year that he passed away. So this is something that you know better than me, but I just think that I know that he was so much more than what I've described here, which is a car salesman. He was an actor, businessman, yes, but he was the father of 4 wonderful children. And the thing, obviously, I try to look at everything as having a good and a bad side. And although it's unfortunate that my mother passed away when I was 2, I feel like since I was raised by just my dad, I feel like I got a lot of Brubaker in me as a result of that. So it's really, I gotta tell you guys, as somebody that has never even been to Pennsylvania before, I'm really surprised at how much I'm moved by being here and seeing all these other Brubakers, and like what a treat it is. It's really something special, and I guarantee this won't be my last one. So thank you guys for having me, and I'm gonna pass it back.
Well, I should tell you,
My mother's uncle, Claude Brubaker, had a Hudson dealership. Pennsylvania.
we Brubakers love our cars.
I know.
Brubaker box.
Yes, there was a Brubaker box. It wasn't me, and I'm glad because it didn't make it. I want to tell you a quick story about this young man right here, because our family was fun, and you all seem to be pretty darn fun too. There's a lot of laughter, and I don't know that laughter and joy is genetic, but whatever it is, maybe it's in the water, but we do have a good time. But I'm going to tell you, so you know that my son was raised by me and a wonderful nanny, but I would call him. This will underscore the fact that we do have a lot of humor in this family. I would call him while I was traveling. I was building my own business. I was gone about 2/3 of the time, and I would call him at the end of the day, every day, and I'd say, "Son, how are you?" And he'd tell me about his day. Well, this one particular time, he answered the phone when I called, and I could hear his voice, but he said, "Hello." I said, "Jay?" He said, "Yeah, hi, Dad." I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah." So I was a little concerned. He was whispering, and that seemed a little odd, So I said, "Look, Jay, do me a favor. Put Mary," that was the nanny, "on the phone. I'd like to talk to her." He said, "Mary can't come to the phone right now." I said, "Jay, why can't Mary come to the phone?" He said, "She's busy." I said, "Okay." So my godson lived with me as well. He was like 20. I said, "Well, Jay, Get Tommy, if you would. I'd like to talk to Tommy. Just a little concerned about this whispering thing. And Jay said, he can't come to the phone right now. He can't come to the phone. I said, son, why can't Tommy come to the phone? He said, Dad, he's busy. So now I am a little concerned. So I said, son, is there an adult there, please? I'd like to talk to an adult. He said, yeah, there's a fireman. I said, a fireman? Well, put him on the phone, please, Jay. He said, Daddy, he can't come to the phone. He can't come to the phone right now. I said, son, get the fireman. He can't come to the phone right now. I said, why can't he come to the phone? He's busy. I said, son, I need to talk to an adult. Is there an adult there, please, that I can talk to? He said, yes, there's another adult here. Put him on, Jay. He said, he's a policeman and he's busy. A policeman? Yes, he's a policeman. I said, son, I'm a little concerned. Mary can't come to the phone, the nanny. Tommy, my godson, can't come to the phone. The fireman can't come to the phone. And the policeman can't come to the phone because they're busy. I said, son, what are they busy doing? He said, Dad, they're busy looking for me. Starts at an early age in the Brubaker family. I can tell you that for sure. Well, let's get away from cars and let's talk about the family a little bit. So this is the Brubaker family on the West Coast. That's all there is. The beautiful woman on the right is Virginia Rose Peterson, who was the mother of all of these kids. There's 4 of us, and that's Bru up there sitting at the piano or looking at the piano. He never played it, but that's for sure. But that's the family, and that was my sisters and the whole group when we were just a kid. When I was a kid, and that's me at the piano there. I took lessons at an early age, and we all learned to play. The kids all learned to play the piano. We're moving up the tree a little bit. So this beautiful blonde lady here is Jay's mother, Kobe Brubaker. And she used to say to me, you know what, I want more than anything for you to have another Brubaker, because I know you're the last one and your dad was the last one in your tree, and I want you to have another son. So after 2 years of marriage, she gave me Jay Lloyd Brubaker. But she did it in style, a true Southern lady. Somehow or another made him come 2 weeks early, and he was born on my birthday, May 22nd. Now, you can't make that up unless you're in Hollywood, but he really did come on that same day. So May 22nd is a double winner day for me. And ever since then, I've never had a birthday. Because every year there's a cake and it says, happy birthday, Jay. And then, P.S., you too, Dad. Except last year in May, I turned 75. And it was, P.S., you too, Jay. So this is Michelle. She's a beautiful lady from Southern California, and Justin David. And this on the right, actually, that's the daddy up there, you can see. And the little guy with his sunglasses, yeah, he's got a sense of humor too, and he's only 2, just turned 2 last Sunday. And then this is my 75th birthday with Michelle, and Justin David, and the little girl up there behind my head is Elise Kobe Brubaker. And she's a little doll, and her birthday's coming up, gosh, this month, Jay. Oh, I'm so sorry. January 10th. I got that part. And there's the little kiddos, Justin and Elise, and that is the little girl when she was born, and that's his beautiful bride. And that's the little girl just recently, Elise, and that's the fact that they seem to love each other, those kids. So, let me tell you a few things about the family on the coast. Because my dad was more than just a businessman, an entrepreneur, salesman, actor. He was a charismatic man of principles. And I used to always wonder, where did he get all of these values? Where did they originate? Because I didn't know about you folks until recently, although I just knew he was from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I was here once in 1976 on a business trip, but I'll tell you about that in a minute. But what I learned was from my dad, and I hope that I pass this on to my son who's passing it on to his son, is the importance of integrity, punctuality, politeness, respect, honesty, and the value of setting goals. Working hard was something he always did, and that's our tradition. That's what we Brubakers do. I do recall on one occasion, after actually him listening to one of my problems, he looked at me and he said, "Son," he said, "rather than have me tell you what I think you should do," he said, "ask yourself this: what would Jesus do?" And I thought, wow, that is something that resonates and still does with me in our family and in our religious commitment. So I mentioned that I was here in 1976. And I was here for maybe a day and a half on a business trip to sell vitamins. I was in the nutrition business. And I sold them to a chain of stores called Acme Supermarkets in Lancaster. And I told a Brubaker here that I was going to be in town and that I was related to Lloyd Burkholder Brubaker. And when I got to the Marriott, there were like 30 Brubakers there. Who are these people? They all came for lunch. And we had such a good time. And it was so much, it was sensory overload. There were so many Brubakers, I couldn't remember everybody, and then they were gone. They were gone. But on the way home, I wrote a poem about that day. And I found it when I got ready to go on this trip. And I read through it, and it still resonates, even more so now than it did then. And I shall share it with you. It said, "What a feeling, Dad, to be where you and a big part of me were born. A place where they know how special you were. Where talk of you puts you right back at the dinner table. I guess I had to know that part of this was home when I didn't have to spell Brubaker to the long distance operator. And when people I hadn't seen in 20 years were so happy to see me again, and they said how much I look like Rue. Your sister Ruth looks like you, Dad, with the same sparkle in her eyes. And Bud sounds like you. Honestly, the very same deep and kind, loving voice. They are your people first, Dad. Always will be. But even now, I remember, bittersweet, of how much I wished you could have been there, but how much I was that so much of you could be. And that was my poem, and it still resonates in me today, to be able to be with you and to have this kind of feeling of family. So I'm going to close with this. This last slide is a movie that came out last week, and it's called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And it's a story about Hollywood in 1969, and it is a fictional story. The story of my dad started in 1932 when he came to Hollywood, and he had his once upon a time in Hollywood story. But his story wasn't fiction at all. It was real. Thank you so much for letting me tell you this story. Thank you.